Good morning, everyone. We're peptiblocks, the group formerly known as Folder, and this is our final presentation. So peptiblocks is a 3D puzzle game that users play to help researchers solve protein problems. Okay, but what the heck's a protein problem? We all know by now that you shouldn't introduce a term without explaining the background. So that ties into the why and why we want to build this app. So proteins have a lot of different functions that make them really useful, but these functions are all dependent on their structure, so how they're arranged in three-dimensional space. And figuring out that structure is a protein problem, and it's the kind of protein problem that we're interested in solving. Because once you know a protein's structure, how it's arranged in three-dimensional space, then you can start to use it for different things. So the good example is HIV protease. So we knew about this, this protein for years, but we didn't know its structure. And once its structure was discovered, actually by a game similar to peptiblocks called Fold It, it can now be used as a drug target for treating HIV infection. So you can see how this kind of app would be useful for researchers in the future. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we gamified this whole process, and we're going to have to go into some biochemistry. But bear with me, don't worry. I'll make it simple, easy. It'll be good. So this is an amino acid here, and there are 20 different kinds of amino acid distinguished by these R groups. So they all have different chemical groups there. And we can categorize them 4 different ways based on their properties. But the backbone is always the same, okay? And in proteins, amino acids are strung together one by one to form a linear chain, okay? And you can see we've color-coded them according to their properties here. Sometimes those chains form secondary structures, we call them. So they're these regularly repeating structures that are linked by unstructured regions, okay? And for us, we decided to work at the level of these secondary structures. That's an easy unit to work with. If we were to look at the individual interactions, that problem becomes much, much more difficult. But if we look at the interactions of these pieces, it's a lot easier. So there's 2 major structures. There's beta sheets, which are sort of a flat structure, and alpha helices, which are sort of like a winding staircase. And you can see the individual amino acid properties, so like red, yellow, blue, they kind of stick off the sides of each of these structures, okay? So what we did is we took those 2 structures and we turned them into regularly shaped blocks, and we translated those amino acid properties to the space that they would occupy if we were to turn this shape, for example, into this regular shape here. So that's how we converted this idea of the secondary structure into our basic game blocks and retained those amino acid properties. In terms of play, users will be presented with the blocks along the linear chain of the protein, and they'll be responsible for arranging them in 3-dimensional space according to some rules. Okay? And those rules, they have to minimize space, they have to manage water interaction, and they have to manage acid-base interaction. So red blocks should be on the outside, red blocks should be on the inside, blue should be on the outside, and yellow and green should go together, but not with their own color. Okay? And users don't necessarily have to understand why these rules exist. However, they do represent real physical interactions that would happen in the protein. And obviously, there's going to be a tutorial element to the game that will help users learn these rules. So once they've moved through the whole protein from one end to the other, they submit their structure, and it will be sent to a server, and we can analyze that structure and basically convert it from those blocks back into a 3-dimensional structure that makes sense. So at the end of the day, it'll look something like this. Okay? So this is a simple one. We've got 3 beta sheets here, 1, 2, 3, and an alpha helix, and you can see how they're arranged in relation to each other. So the users will be responsible for figuring out that structure, and when they submit their answer in terms of blocks, we'll convert it back into something like this, and then that'll give researchers an idea of how it looks. Okay? So for now, I'll pass it over to Ding for a quick demo of gameplay.
Okay, welcome to peptiblocks. The first screen is the home screen. We know that it's quite empty here, but we intend for leave the space for potential sponsors. And if you sponsors, your logo will come here. Okay, by clicking on the start, here is the level selection screen. We have 7 levels available at this moment, but we'll add more later. Each one represents a real protein. Now we pulled data from a protein database. Let's start with the simplest one. In the real game, we can see that on the top side, we have score on the left-hand side and the number of blocks left on the right-hand side. The bottom part is the controlling part. which looks like a PS3 controller. So you control the blocks by clicking movement here, up and down here, and rotation in different axes here. We have two other buttons here, the information as a quick reference for the rules, and the menu, which allows you to quit and go back to the level selection screen. Okay, now let's start playing. So can control the camera by 2 fingers touching on the screen and rotate and see a different angle. If you're done with the first block, you can click on the green button that will like add a new block, and you can move the new block. So if you keep playing, the goal is to minimize the space and according to the rules to apply the rules. So what I want to do here is there is 3 red blocks here and 1 here. If I can cover them with the new block, that will minimize the exposure of the red blocks, which is a good move. So what I actually want to do is I want to rotate this way, move down, cover it. Probably this is better. So if you just keep playing, you have you can get a higher score. In the end, I got 7,300 scores for this level. And the data is stored locally at this point and will send to the server. If you're really curious about the protein data structure, you can long hold a level. I will lead you to the protein database with the level you just played. And you can see the data structure, not the data structure, the protein data structure and their properties if you want to read more. That concludes the demo. Thank you.
So, as we can see here, the block diagram provides an overview of our high-level design. So, the main responsibility of the protein engine is to store both the FASTA sequence data and the signal structure mapping information, and then it will also all this information is retrieved from online protein database, and the protein engine will also determine the property of each amino acid based on the information on the amino acid property database, and finally the game engine will transfer all of them into blocks in sequence. Oops. Sorry. Also, in terms of learning, so if we can start the project over, we might want to choose a mature 3-dimensional game engines, for example, the Unity game engine, and it will be. And in addition, it will be better if the programmer have a deeper and larger knowledge of the whole protein folding process.
We might also like to prioritize gamification a little bit more. We sort of went with the first abstraction that made sense, but there might be other game models that would be useful, and so it would be cool to look at those different game models.
And for future works, first we want to add more levels, more proteins, probably as a downloadable content DLC, for free of course. And probably work on more on the scoring engine. We have only 4 rules at this moment, but we can add more, like according to the real physical protein structure and their properties. And we probably need a better art design in terms of like animations. We know that the blocks looks like just the blocks. We probably can make it more like attractive. And lastly, you can probably we can add a server that collects the data and do the analysis and send it to the researchers, and probably have an in-game tutorial that on the screen that tells you what you need to do exactly for the next move. Thank you.
Thanks. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question about this is really interesting, exciting, and nice to see. By the way, Christian, your field is
Metabolic and protein engineering.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, you forgot to introduce yourselves. It's good to give the context of where you came from. In that part where you were reorienting the block and labeling down, I was watching the score closely to see if it changed when you moved it. It didn't. The score didn't change.
It does change if you you move to the next one.
Oh,
so
so
you're
you got
still moving because you're still deciding which position you want to put it. So I don't calculate a score right away.
So you don't know if
you finish this block and move down to the next one that I calculate. Because it's done, it's already done, you won't move it again.
So doesn't that mean there should be, so that's the score having achieved that and locked it in, but shouldn't you be telling me, that looks good, by giving me a interim score on this current
thing? Oh, of course, this is for future works, we really want to add this in, and the only problem is calculating the score based on its positioning, because I need to check every other position. If there is adjacency block, which color is it, the compactness, it takes a lot of time.
No, it didn't actually. It seemed to be really quick when you went like that.
Yeah,
I mean, what's a lot of time for what?
Keep moving and let the device always run on the scoring. Then I don't.
Have you tried that?
No, actually, this is my worry, because I need to.
You know, there's
as blocks add more blocks, then more I have to check. It's like probably n squared.
Sure, but it depends on what n is. So I mean, the rule in computer performance tuning is try it and see, unless you know for sure it's deadly. But it seems like immediate feedback is really important.
Probably we should if there is another design for testing the collision and the adjacency, probably this is possible in real time. Yeah.
Is there any physical reason behind the placing one block then the next block fully versus, I can imagine in that case you're going to find the best solution for each move, but that might not be a globally optimal one.
Yeah.
So why don't I have access to all the blocks and I can kind of move them as I see fit?
Yeah. So that would be a perfect best case scenario, to have all of the blocks and move them all. I think we sort of looked at that game Foldit, which is a computer-based game where that's the case. And it's very difficult. The learning curve becomes very, very steep. So I think the major issue for us was accessibility. So making sure that every user would be able to play it. And everyone's played Tetris before, where you've got a block in sequence. So perhaps future iterations would look at, how can we give all of the blocks at one time and have users handle that. Yeah.
So are humans actually better at solving this problem than just writing an algorithm to try all the different combinations? And what's the complexity of that? Why would people be better at it than computers?
So humans are empirically at least as good as computers at doing it for this particular kind of problem. So this game that I referenced, Foldit, it's based on this app called Foldit Home, and you could watch your screensaver solve protein problems when your computer was idle. And users would watch it and see the algorithm make moves that didn't make sense because they were intuitively didn't make sense, but the computer obviously has to go through every different interaction between every single amino acid pair. And so this game Foldit was developed where you could make rational steps instead. And so it's been shown, just the results from people playing this game, that people are at least as good as computers in terms of efficiency of solving these problems. For now, I'm sure as computational protein design algorithms get better, computers will start to outpace people. But the other issue is that it takes a lot of computational power to solve these problems. Yeah.
I really like when you get into the game and you can move it around and stuff. The only issue is when you choose which level, I couldn't tell right away which one's the hardest one. I mean, I'll obviously choose the first one, but maybe it would be better if you had you can unlock the levels. Maybe you could have start with the first 3 and then unlock as you go forward, so they have practice.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
That'd be interesting to do something like Tetris is actually preview the next blocks that come, because I couldn't see that. It just seemed like they magically came and you didn't really know it was coming. At least you could have a chance to try to optimize it a little bit. Yeah, that's a good idea too.
Great.
Thank you.
Really exciting. Thank you.